Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by NextGen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. Welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. With me today is Nina Mannheimer, co-founder and CPO of CLIM. Welcome, Nina.
Hi, great to be here.
Great to have you here. I'm so glad to get to chat with you and learn about CLIM and you. So welcome.
Yeah, I'm excited.
For those not familiar with CLIM, would you be able to just give us a little overview before we dive deep into this?
Yes, of course. So we are a startup based in Berlin on a mission to scale regenerative agriculture. So we really see ourselves as what we call a digital companion for farmers looking to transition to regenerative agriculture. And our approach is to help farmers overcome the hurdles that they're currently facing in that transition. So we did a lot of research at the beginning and really tried to understand what is currently stopping farmers from making that step, and that's how we built the platform, really helping them every step of the way. That's why we call it a companion, really looking also at the human and behavior side of things to make sure that farmers actually make the transition that is so important for all of us.
Wow, that's great, and what a great mission to have. So
yeah, it's a good one to rally people around, and you can say it in one sentence, which is always nice.
And I like the idea of having a companion that's going to be able to assist me in these things.
Yeah.
Right? It's so well-meaning as well. So, before we get going, I'd love to hear from you, because I've had this conversation with a variety of different people, and there seems to be some nuance to the definition of what, regenerative agriculture is.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear from you on what your interpretation or how you're defining it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think sometimes that whole question around how to define it seems to, put a whole pause button on the entire movement, because if you don't know how to define it, how can you scale it? I think that's it is a super important question, but I also think it's important not to get lost in the details. There's a lot of debate around, is this regenerative? Is that regenerative? When is a farmer regenerative? And I think, for us, we think about these questions a lot, but we also make sure not to let them slow us down. Mm-hmm. So for us, our focus is really on helping all farmers transition towards a more soil and climate friendly way of doing agriculture. So when we started, we saw that there's a lot of companies helping very progressive farmers. So for instance, in the US where you are, there's a lot of really amazing, really progressive, super advanced farmers that everyone would call regenerative. And they're doing what I would say is amazing pioneering work, like showing others how to do it, creating a sense of hope and optimism, and sort of having these great examples. But the reality is that most farmers aren't there yet. So for us, it's super important not to define regenerative agriculture as this ultra advanced way of doing agriculture, as sort of, I've heard, especially in the US context, a lot of people say it's sort of like organic plus or the next organic or something like that. For us, it's not that. For us, it's a group of measures that enable farmers to build up soil health. That's why I think the term regenerative is still true, even though a lot of people criticize it. Restore soil health and thereby also have a positive impact on the climate. And we really define it more through the measures that are being applied rather than the state that a farmer is at. So in our case, a farmer doesn't have to be super advanced and progressive to be part of CLIM and start that transition. We really care about moving everyone along that spectrum of soil health and climate friendliness.
So you're trying to make it accessible. And
exactly. Exactly. So we're trying to make it accessible in terms of how difficult it is, and also in terms of how affordable it is and the pace that farmers can do the transition in.
Right, because I think that, as you said, it can be daunting and it can be overwhelming. And so from what I'm hearing from you is that this companion can make it more accessible and can walk people through this process in a more accessible, friendly, affordable way.
Exactly. And we're really thinking about, how to drive long-term systemic change. So how can we really not only make it accessible, but actually make all farmers or most farmers apply these measures rather than creating sort of a perfect environment, but that will only be able to engage a tiny fraction of farmers because it's just so complicated.
Right. So I'm curious, what inspired you to co-found this great mission-driven business that's going
Yeah,
to
so
give people this great companion?
Yeah, so I have to admit that at the beginning, we weren't even exclusively looking at agriculture. It seems crazy now because now we're so deep in agriculture, but at the very beginning, my co-founder Rob, who had been thinking about the idea for longer than I had, he was really focused on this idea of carbon sequestration. So he just looked at the climate goals and saw that there's no way we can reach the 1.5-degree goal without actively storing carbon. So, we can reduce as much as we can, even if we stopped, flying and doing everything, there's no way that we can reach the goal if we're not also sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. So he was really passionate about starting something in that space specifically. And regenerative agriculture happens to be one of the most powerful ways to store CO2 actively. So that's how he got into that space originally. I came from a completely different direction. I was really interested in permaculture. I'm a huge foodie, so I was really interested in just how to grow food sustainably that tastes really well. So I was much more in this sort of niche world of permaculture, small farms, really high-end food production. And then we met and started chatting. And to be honest, until I met him, I hadn't even realized how big the potential is of regenerative agriculture when it comes to climate protection. And it's really bringing these two things together, the huge impact and climate aspect, but also this idea of how do we just make our foods more nutrient rich and better and more sustainable overall. That's really how we came together and decided to start something in this space.
Wow. So what has it been like to build a business? Were you and Rob friends first, or were you colleagues?
No, so we met through through the network of our first investor. So we met and then we spent a few months just chatting. We always call it co-founder dating. It's sort of like this sort of awkward courtship where you're asking lots of questions and really getting to know each other. And then it was after, I think, 4 or 5 months that we decided to actually do it together, and that then also our third co-founder, Edith, then joined.
So
Yeah, it's been great.
I'm sorry. So were you looking to build a separate startup at this time? Because you said founder dating, so it sounds like you guys were each doing your own startups.
No, I meant like co-founder dating, as in like trying to figure out whether you want to be with
Oh, okay,
someone.
got
But
it.
as a co-founder, no. So Rob was already super set on starting the business. He had been working on the whole scientific model and like just figuring out like how can you actually create a startup in the space, because it's not immediately obvious how that can even turn into a startup model. So he was really figuring out on a high level, is it even possible? And if so, how? And I was figuring it out. I wasn't entirely sure whether my next step was going to be founding my own startup or whether my next step was going to be joining an existing startup. And then it was only through meeting him and through these really intense, long conversations in that period that it really made sense to me to do it.
Got it. I understand. And so you guys came together and you built this startup. And so what was that like for you? Did you guys sort of iron out like where your skill sets lie and how you were going to then develop this business together?
Yeah, I think the division of labor was really clear from the start. At the beginning, everyone does a little bit of everything, right? Like there's no one to do anything. So I remember Edith, our third co-founder, who's the CTO, Edith and I were just building the first version of our platform together. He was doing all of the engineering work and I was doing all of the design, product, content, everything work. And it looked horrendous because I'm not a great designer. And I mean, I used to work at a really like fancy, nice design agency. So I knew what great design looked like, and I knew that it wasn't what I was doing. But it's, you know, I think it's a great way to get started. I think, you know, you shouldn't let your lack of skills or capacities stop you, because it was such a great learning experience for us in terms of just getting the first thing out there. But then from then on, it's also been a great journey to continuously then start to hire people who actually know what they're doing in their respective fields. So it's definitely, I mean, I loved the beginning, but I think every phase has a different great element about it.
Yeah, I think it's a very scrappy place to be in the beginning. And I think it's a really fun, and exciting time also, right? And you realize
Definitely.
push yourself to do things you never thought you could do. They're completely out of your comfort zone, but equally it's really exciting and inspiring.
Yeah, and I also feel like at the beginning, every day matters so much. I remember every single day you come home and you feel like, you know, you've built another part of that platform, or you've done another day of just speaking to farmers and understanding them. Like every day, the sort of the incremental value of every day is so high at the beginning. And that alone, I think, is such a huge energy booster and motivational factor.
Yeah. So now what year did you guys start this business?
We started in the summer of 2020.
2020, sorry. So talk to me about some of the growing pains.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think we at the beginning, we kept thinking, why is no one in the space? I mean, first of all, the impact is enormous. It's so fun to work with farmers. It's, you know, for me, like, you know, really having that product lens on, it's so amazing to build a digital product, but that has consequences on real soil. I think, you know, it's so great. So at the beginning, we were really confused. And then as we kept going forward, we kept hitting some walls and facing new complexities and seeing, you know, all these moving pieces. Like regulation is constantly moving. At the beginning, you know, how companies approached the topic, and like food corporates was constantly moving, and they weren't particularly interested at the very beginning. And I mean, that's changed so much in such a short period of time. It's really hard to imagine nowadays that food corporates didn't care, but they didn't care that much back in the day. And there were just so many moving pieces and so much complexity that after a while we were like, oh, this is why no one is doing what we're doing. So I think that was a big one, but thankfully a lot of that has changed. I think, you know, the market, like, there's a lot more awareness, a lot more interest, a lot more focus, much more budgets flowing into the space. So I think we were really lucky. I think that's a sign that you have great timing, when the first couple of months are super hard because no one knows what you're talking about, and a year in, everyone all of a sudden knows what you're talking about. So I think that was just very lucky for us in terms of timing.
Was there a moment when you realized where like people are finally understanding what we're doing?
Yeah, definitely. There were definitely some moments. So, I mean, one of the best things for us was when the Netflix documentary Kiss the Ground came out. We got so many job applications, and then so many people I spoke to who said, "Oh yeah, you know, I watched Kiss the Ground and I thought, what a great mission. I want to do something in regenerative agriculture. And then I Googled regenerative agriculture startups and I found you." And so that was amazing for hiring, and also with I would say we really noticed it in investor conversations at the very, very beginning, when we started speaking to investors shortly after we started the company. Only very few had even heard about the topic. And, you know, at the beginning, you have these 30-minute intro calls. We had to spend 20-25 minutes explaining regenerative agriculture, and then only had 5 minutes to explain why we were so great. And it was super stressful, and we never felt like we had enough time. And then it was roughly a year later when was it? Like, yeah, maybe roughly a year later when we started fundraising again for our next round. All of a sudden, you know, lots of investors were like totally caught up around what the benefits of regenerative are and why they should invest in that space. And it saved us loads of time, and we could actually focus on what our value is and, you know, how great the team is, rather than just explaining the basics of regenerative agriculture. So that was definitely something where we just felt, wow, it's really changed very quickly.
Wow, it must have felt amazing.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was a big relief. And of course, you know, there's sort of this big hype around the space. But for us, of course, it's, I mean, it's a very justified hype. And, you know, there's so much positive impact to be done here. So we're just super happy to see it grow in all directions.
And so now that you've raised some money, you have some talent, what does it look like for Klim for the future, for the next few years? Now that you've used the app, you've used the service, and people have their companion, are you getting, what's the feedback like?
Yeah, so the feedback has been really great. So we launched the first version of the app in around April, May 2021. So it's been almost 2 years now. And it's just been, you know, such a growth curve. What we're really noticing is that compared to a lot of other companies, we really place a lot of emphasis on the human. And I mean, that's such a, you know, it sounds like such a cliche thing to say, because all design is meant to be user-centric, and user experience is a huge thing. But actually, when you look at agricultural products, I don't think that that's often the case. I think a lot of them are either technology focused or industry focused, and not a lot of them really put the human at the center. And I think that's really where we have a huge impact, is that we really think about convenience for the user. We really think about we really think about how does change really happen on a farm. So that's sort of been, you know, some of the most interesting insights of the past 2 years. And thinking about the future, so we you know, one of the value propositions we have for farmers is access to financing, because transitioning to regenerative agriculture is expensive. And of course, if you're financing that transition, the funds have to come from somewhere. And so we started having some really great and you know, very effective collaborations with some food corporates on the side, who are looking to make their supply chains more regenerative. And we believe that there's really so much power in connecting the agricultural side and the farmers and the B2B, the sort of food corporate side, because their interest is similar. They both want to be resilient for the future. They both want their part of the supply chain to be more climate friendly. They both need healthy soils in order to do business. So we noticed that actually the interests are very aligned, and food corporates are increasingly seeing the value also of regenerative agriculture in terms of their climate impact, but also in terms of their overall performance and resilience and quality of food and so on. So really bridging that gap is our focus area now, and really thinking about, so how do we enable farmers to do the transition on the ground, but then equally, how do we enable food companies to make the transition and have the access to the agricultural side of their supply chain that they need in order to drive that change.
And which is the larger challenge for you?
We always get that question from investors and other people, and everyone has a different opinion. So even internally, lots of people have different opinions. Personally, I think the agricultural side is harder than the corporate side, simply because it's more scattered. There's more, you know, there's so many different types of farmers. I also think that, you know, behavior change takes a really long time. I think there's so much at stake for them. There's so much, you know, there's so much happening on a farm already, that I think, you know, creating a big change it is hard, but it's, you know, it's a challenge that we love in the product team, and that's, you know, our platform is really focused on that. And I'm very optimistic around it, but I do think that it is a big challenge to solve.
Awesome. So, you know, what can we expect from Klim going forward in the next, you know, year for the farmers and for others to look forward to? How could they implement this in the short term to make changes, and in the long term? But right now, like, what would be a short term thing that they could gain by including this as a companion for themselves?
You mean in terms of effects on the farm?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting to compare the shorter term and the longer term things. So one thing that we talk about a lot is, you know, farmers essentially are entrepreneurs. A lot of them run their own business. And so for us, it's important that they also see adopting regenerative measures, in a sense, it's a way of investing in their own business, right? You might not have short-term rewards in all cases or immediately, or sometimes in the short term it doesn't look that interesting, but actually once you look at a few years down the line, it starts to become really interesting. That being said, we do see that most of our farmers are also happy with short-term results. So they, even in the scope of a year, even if you're implementing just a few of the simpler measures like catch crops, cover crops, planting hedges, that kind of thing, we are seeing that farmers are seeing their soil getting healthier, getting a little bit more resilient. So, we're already seeing certain extreme weather events all around the globe, of course, and Germany is not an exception. And our farmers are reporting to us that their soils are a little bit more resilient, especially to periods of droughts or intense rain. So that's really great. And I think we see it a little bit as a snowball. So at the beginning, you might be skeptical as a farmer, and then once you start seeing some small positive results, you start getting more confident, and then it kind of snowballs into this bigger thing where by seeing the positive results, you're going to do more.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad that I got to connect with you, learn about CLIM, and see what's on the horizon for the future. So if folks wanted to follow up and learn more about CLIM, what's the easiest way for them to go about doing that?
Yeah, so the easiest way is probably to follow us on LinkedIn, or check out our website. We also do a monthly newsletter on LinkedIn, which is focused on decarbonizing the food industry and looks more at the B2B side, which is also really exciting. Or you can also follow our Instagram channels, although our farmer channel is in German only at the moment, but soon to be international.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose, and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.